The trade map of North America has just been redrawn. In a move that stunned Washington, Mexico has officially joined Canada's $120 billion Northern Trade Corridor, an ambitious freight route designed to completely bypass President Donald Trump's heavy-handed 30% tariff on steel, auto parts, and strategic minerals. The two nations are quietly steering billions in goods away from U.S. customs checkpoints and into their own ports, railways, and bonded zones. Could this bold maneuver trigger a collapse in Midwestern manufacturing and force a dramatic policy shift in the White House? In today's report, we'll unpack how Mexico and Canada's economic alliance could permanently disrupt trade flows, undermine Trump's tariff wall, and reshape regional supply chains. Before we dive in, make sure to subscribe to our channel, turn on notifications, and like this video to stay informed on every critical update. Mexico and Canada have long functioned as parallel players in North American trade, but never before have they launched a coordinated maneuver of this scale. As President Donald Trump announced a sweeping 30% tariff on steel, auto parts, and battery components, both governments quickly moved to re-engineer the flow of commerce. What emerged was a fully operational strategy now known as the Northern Trade Corridor, a direct bypass of U.S. ports, customs, and logistics systems. Behind the scenes, Mexico's Ministry of Economy and Canada's Transport Authority began aligning infrastructure protocols, free zone rules, and port authorities. By mid-2024, they unveiled a plan that would divert over $120 billion worth of bilateral trade through entirely non-U.S. routes. The goal was clear: shield their manufacturing ecosystems from unpredictable U.S. tariffs and secure tighter bilateral supply chains. This corridor's western flank begins with Mexico's rail hubs in Monterrey and Guadalajara, where freight modules loaded with lithium-ion cells, magnesium parts, and semi-finished EV components are shipped via new express links to Mazatlan and Topolobampo. From there, container ships follow a direct maritime route to Canada's Prince Rupert and Deltaport terminals in British Columbia. These ports have seen $3.6 billion in upgrades since 2020, transforming them into high-capacity receiving stations for automated container offloading, customs digitization, and short-sea shipment relays. Canada's outbound goods, particularly cold-rolled steel, softwood lumber, and nickel hydroxide for batteries, take a mirrored route. Cargo is loaded in Halifax or Hamilton and shipped south through Cuba's Mariel port, where it's repackaged and redirected to Veracruz and Progreso on Mexico's Gulf Coast. These shipments are all certified under Canada's CBSA Green Flow Code, exempting them from the customs fees that would normally apply when routed through U.S. ports like New Orleans or Houston. The key value lies not only in trade volume, but in the avoidance of American logistics bottlenecks. By avoiding U.S. territory entirely, the two nations eliminate warehouse holding costs, transit delays, and layered insurance policies typically required under U.S. customs scrutiny. An internal audit by the Canada Border Services Agency, CBSA, estimates that bypassing Detroit and Buffalo alone saves roughly $68 per ton in processing, fuel, and inspection surcharges. The economic hit to the U.S. logistics sector is already being felt. In 2024, U.S. Customs and Border Protection, CBP, reported that $762 billion in trilateral goods passed through American ports, of which $133 billion were pass-through shipments. Goods that originated in Mexico or Canada underwent processing in the U.S. and were shipped onward. Under the Northern Corridor model, nearly $70 billion of this value is targeted for rerouting through Canada-Mexico-only logistics nodes by the end of 2026. The loss is not abstract. It will hit specific sectors: port authorities in Los Angeles, shipping firms in New Jersey, fuel tax collectors in Arizona, and warehouse operators in Ohio. The American Trucking Associations, ATA, estimates that U.S. toll and fuel tax losses could exceed $4.2 billion per year due to the thousands of trucks now removed from north-south interstate routes like I-35 and I-69. One of the most strategically critical junctions in this corridor is the Pacific Short Rail Link, which connects Vancouver with central Alberta and eventually taps into the Sonora-Durango Highway on the Mexican side. This dual-country freight path allows materials to move uninterrupted across two high-capacity nodes without entering U.S. territory. Trucks carrying Canadian aluminum now deliver directly to battery plants in Querétaro, while Mexican graphite is shipped to Ontario's Battery Valley, bypassing customs choke points in Michigan. It's not just goods, data flows are also shifting. Canada's blockchain-based customs approval protocol, integrated with Mexico's TFAS port mesh network, eliminates the need for U.S. customs pre-clearance forms. Documents are now jointly approved via cryptographic hash between two national servers, completely excluding Washington from the oversight process. In doing so, the two nations effectively nullify the $35 shadow inspection fee that CBP levied on every U.S.-cleared consignment. This creates a multi-layered loss for the U.S. economy. First, there is the direct revenue decline, estimated at $69 billion across port handling, customs fees, and warehouse surcharges. Then there's the secondary hit to supply chain logistics, estimated at $18 billion, including lost jobs in warehousing, trucking, and compliance services. The third tier is the employment multiplier effect, where each lost shipment cancels downstream jobs and spending, an additional $34 billion drain. Taken together, the combined impact of the Northern Trade Corridor across all three layers is $121 billion over 2 years, an amount nearly equivalent to the entire U.S. auto industry's annual export revenue. But perhaps most telling is the impact on industrial zones like Detroit. Under the pre-bypass system, Detroit's assembly plants received $86 billion in parts from Mexico and Canada. Now, with Canadian EV components going directly to Mexico's Baja Tech and Mexican lithium batteries routed straight to GM Canada's Kami plant, Detroit stands to lose nearly 365,000 assembled vehicles annually. Based on Department of Labor estimates, this translates to a loss of over 100,000 indirect jobs and a $12.4 billion wage tax drain. The ripple effect reaches into labor unions and election zones. Longshoremen at U.S. Great Lakes ports like Duluth and Buffalo have warned of shift cancellations, while Indiana-based component factories are already operating at 70% capacity. If the current trend continues, the Midwest could see a 2.7% GDP contraction, concentrated in states like Ohio, Illinois, and Wisconsin, states critical to any U.S. presidential race. In Canadian and Mexican capitals, however, momentum is building. Ottawa has allocated an additional $2.1 billion CAD in development loans through Export Development Canada, EDC, while Mexico's Bancomext Bank has committed 27 billion pesos in corridor financing. These figures are now baked into national infrastructure budgets through 2028, signaling that the corridor will persist even if U.S. tariffs are eventually lifted. The real game changer, though, is cost efficiency. According to new route estimates from Canadian trade officials, the average cost per ton to ship goods directly between Canada and Mexico is $67, compared to $103 per ton via traditional U.S. pipelines. The 54% savings not only reduce overhead but also increase bilateral bargaining power with Europe and Asia. As the Northern Trade Corridor gains traction, the question arises, can the United States afford to remain sidelined? So far, Washington's response has been reactionary at best. President Trump has doubled down on tariffs, claiming they're necessary to protect American steel, American jobs, and American sovereignty. But this hardline stance is increasingly backfiring. Not only has it failed to slow down Canada and Mexico's coordination, but it's also accelerated the regional realignment of trade that leaves the U.S. isolated in its own neighborhood. Corporate America has taken notice. Tesla, which once relied heavily on Nevada's lithium and Michigan's metal stamping facilities, has now redirected its Tier 2 sourcing. Its new vehicle battery supply chain taps directly into Canadian cathode materials and Mexican lithium hydroxide. Meanwhile, Volkswagen's North American subsidiary confirmed that all its new EV lines for Latin America will be built entirely within the corridor, excluding any U.S. intermediaries. The logistics shift isn't just strategic, it's structural. Canadian National Railway and Ferromex have launched Project SpineLink, a 5,700 kilometers track network that runs from Vancouver to Mexico City, bypassing U.S. inspection yards entirely. In a stark sign of the times, Houston-based cargo insurer Freehold Risk Group recently slashed coverage for cross-border loads by 27% due to emerging redundancy in U.S. clearance zones. Their statement reflected a painful truth. The U.S. is no longer the default passageway, it's now the detour. This isolation is most visible in once thriving port cities. In Baltimore, monthly cargo volume from Canada has dropped 61% since early 2024. San Diego's Otay Mesa checkpoint, a major hub for Mexican electronics shipments, has seen throughput plunge by 47%. Freight forwarding companies such as Transport USA are reporting mass layoffs, citing route obsolescence and reduced customs workload. A senior manager admitted off record, "We've become middlemen nobody needs anymore." At the heart of the disruption is the tariff reciprocity doctrine, introduced by Canada and adopted by Mexico in early 2025. Under this new framework, any tariff imposed by the U.S. is met with an equal trade redirection, not retaliation. So when Washington raised duties on Canadian copper and Mexican auto parts, Ottawa and Mexico City didn't slap counter tariffs. They simply rebooked shipping routes, diverted supply chains, and restructured trade flows, eliminating American leverage without firing a shot. This doctrine has turned out to be surprisingly potent. Because it avoids open trade war escalation, it keeps diplomatic doors open while making U.S. trade policy increasingly irrelevant. In other words, the U.S. can't fight what it can't touch. The Northern Corridor's rerouting strategy functions like a silent boycott. No protests, no headlines, just empty ports and quiet layoffs. Investors are shifting accordingly. In Q2 2025 alone, Canadian infrastructure bonds tied to corridor upgrades saw a 12.3% yield spike, while U.S. Port Authority bonds fell into junk status. Mexican private equity firm Grupo Litoral, which manages logistics terminals in Colima and Tamaulipas, closed a $500 million fund backed by Canadian pension groups, with one purpose: corridor expansion. It's a signal the world is watching and betting against U.S. dominance. Meanwhile, indigenous trade zones are expanding. Mexico has formalized the Zonas Libres del Norte, while Canada designated binational export zones, BEZs, in Saskatchewan and Manitoba. These regions operate under special corridor rules, zero tariffs, integrated customs, and full digital freight visibility. U.S. companies are excluded unless they relocate manufacturing within the corridor. That's already happening. California-based drone maker Novisky is moving operations to Ontario, and Michigan toolmaker Metroforge is opening a $48 million plant in Querétaro. This manufacturing migration is bleeding American innovation. Over the past year, the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office has seen a 19% decline in industrial patents linked to automotive, battery, and materials technology. Meanwhile, Canada and Mexico have posted record-high filings in those same categories, most from factories once based in Illinois, Michigan, and Pennsylvania. Some American lawmakers are sounding the alarm. Senator Amy Klobuchar has urged the White House to reassess the tariff policy, warning of geoeconomic self-sabotage. Even Republican governors from key swing states are quietly pushing for waivers to allow corridor goods to re-enter U.S. markets without penalty. But so far, the Trump administration has stayed the course, treating tariffs as immovable doctrine, not adjustable levers. The fallout is now visible at the state level. Texas, once a dominant force in cross-border commerce, has seen a 38% decline in NAFTA zone activity. Indiana reports a 31% drop in parts assembly contracts. New York's border customs sector, once a key employer in Buffalo and Niagara, is shedding over 6,000 jobs. Even Florida, despite not bordering Canada or Mexico, is seeing a collapse in secondary shipments routed through its ports. That leads to a deeper problem: the loss of influence. As Canada and Mexico strengthen ties through the corridor, they're not just bypassing U.S. geography, they're bypassing U.S. diplomacy. Recent trade summits in Vancouver and Oaxaca were held without a single American delegate present. Instead, representatives from Brazil, the EU, South Korea, and even India attended as observers, exploring new deals that ride the corridor's tariff-free backbone. The corridor is becoming more than a trade route, it's becoming a political alliance. One that quietly excludes the US, not by confrontation, but by design. As supply chains reroute and investments flow elsewhere, the US finds itself not in a trade war, but in a trade vacuum. That vacuum may be permanent. With each redirected shipment, with each relocated factory, with each canceled US contract, the corridor grows, not just in size, but in legitimacy. If current trends hold by the end of 2026, over 60% of Canada-Mexico trade will move entirely outside of US reach. And once that system is in place, it won't just be about avoiding tariffs, it will be about excluding America from the future of North American trade altogether. In short, by trying to tighten control with tariffs and restrictions, the US may have unintentionally accelerated a new trade era, one that flows smoothly without it. The Northern Corridor is no longer just a plan, it's a working reality that benefits Canada and Mexico while leaving America out of its own neighborhood. This shift could lock in a new order that permanently alters North America's trade landscape. What do you think about this development? Share your thoughts below in the comments. To keep up with stories like this, subscribe and turn on notifications. Thanks for watching.